This is the new Sony 50-150 f2 lens. It is about the size of a normal 70-200, but with a constant aperture of f2. Is this like the best lens ever for indoor sports and portraits? Let's check it out. Now, this video isn't sponsored by Sony. They've just lent me this lens for the purpose of making this video, but it is sponsored by Storyblocks, but more on them later. This lens is ridiculous. No one else has ever made a constant aperture 50-150 millimeter lens out there. And I think the thing that, while it's not small, right? Like, we're not sitting here at a tiny little lens. For what it actually is and a constant f2 aperture, it's not really that big. So for a quick little comparison of specs, we're gonna just show it to you next to a couple other lenses that you might have some bit of knowledge of. So obviously we don't have the back cap on here, so I'll take these off as well. And I think that the lens that it's probably gonna be compared to most often is going to be either the Samyang or the Tamron 35-150. So here is the difference in those. It's fairly significant. Like, it's definitely not a small lens in comparison to this at all. It's frankly pretty astonishing that this lens is as small as it is for a 35-150. You're getting 15 extra millimeters on the wide end, but you are giving up that constant aperture, and it switches over to f2.8 fairly quickly. So the way that I use this lens basically is like, it's a 35 millimeter prime at f2. And then all the way the rest of it is pretty much just like a 2.8 prime. So for all of those like more portrait kind of focal lengths, it's really just like a 2.8 lens. And I think that's where the new 50-150 really, really shines, is you're getting a close to prime lens territory in that 85 millimeter range and that 135 millimeter range, which is where I think this thing is really going to be sought after for some people that don't want to frankly carry both of those lenses. Now, especially when I have this lens off of the camera body, it is pretty darn lightweight. It says here on the little reference sheet that Sony provided that it weighs approximately 1,340 grams. And then for some other comparisons that might be helpful, the new Sony 70-200 f2.8 version 2 comes in at just over 1,000 grams. So you're about 300 grams heavier for this one. That being said, the previous model, so the original Sony 70-200, comes in at 1,480 grams, which is, what would that be? 150 grams heavier actually than this lens. Now, I don't have the Tamron, but I believe it is lighter. But in terms of actual weight, the Samyang here actually comes in at about the same. We're at 1,320 grams. And then for another quick comparison, this lens is definitely heavier than the Sony, but this is the Viltrox 135 f1.8, and this comes in at 1,235 grams. So it's actually only weighing, what is that, another 100 grams or so more than this single 135 f1.8. So as far as size and weight goes, it's honestly not that bad. When I first got a quick little briefing of this, the first thing I was thinking is like, oh my gosh, this thing's probably enormous. I was thinking back to like the old Canon 200 millimeter f1.8 and how big that thing was. But really, it's not that bad. It's all internally zooming, so you're not having anything moving back and forth. It really has that kind of 70-200 feel. It's just a little bit thicker right here, right? So one of the things that really shows that is most 70-200s or other lenses in that kind of ilk are around that like 77 millimeter filter threads, 82 millimeters. The thing about this one is we are coming in at 95 millimeter filter threads. So you're definitely a little bit larger on the front element here. And obviously it comes through when you look at it from here, where it comes all the way down to the lens mount and everything. And then it comes up a little bit here. And then we are continuing to extend the width of it a little bit. Now, before we jump in further, it's time to pay some bills and thank today's sponsor, Storyblocks, for their support of the channel. Have you ever been in the middle of editing and realized that you're missing that one extra clip or shot that really could add some more context to your video? Well, if you create video content like I do, even semi-regularly, you'll love how useful their templates and assets are to a creative project. Storyblocks give you unlimited downloads of high-quality, royalty-free stock video, music, sound effects, images, and even motion graphics, all under one predictable subscription with no surprise fees, no digging around 10 different sites for assets, just one hub for everything. And seriously, unlimited downloads. That means you can try 10 different versions of a sequence, test a dozen different music tracks, and not even stress about the costs. It's built in for creators who want freedom and not friction. Speaking of which, everything's organized and ready to drop into your timeline. 4K videos, After Effects templates, even overlays and logo reveals. Plus, if you're editing in Premiere like I do, you can pull assets straight into your project within the Storyblocks plugin. Seriously, it's amazing. So imagine you're on a deadline and your footage didn't turn out the way you hoped. You need a little bit more to add context to your video. You can grab a few cutaways or background shots from Storyblocks and just keep creating. So if you're ready to level up your workflow without slowing down, hit up storyblocks.com/Benj or click the link in the description to get started. So thanks again to Storyblocks for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Now, like any Sony lens that's come out, and obviously this is kind of styled after more of a sports lens, you usually don't get the white lenses in more portrait lenses and things like that. These are usually kind of more reserved for all of their sports stuff. And obviously I can see why this is going to make a great sports lens. The range is similar to a 70-200, but you're getting a lot more light gathering. And especially with a camera like the A7R5, being able to punch in to APS-C crop mode, you're basically getting the same equivalency, or really similar at least. You're getting essentially what would look like a 225 millimeter at f3. So for those that are looking at this going like, oh, but I'm gonna miss that 200 range, maybe if 200 really is kind of the max of your range, then it can definitely do that in a pinch with a higher megapixel camera if you use the APS-C crop mode, and you get the same style look that you would out of a 70-200 at 200 millimeters. And I will definitely say that for everything that I ever do, it's more than enough. And I think the thing that really hits home for this is that if you are okay with f2, pairing this lens with the 28-70 f2 can be a really, really nice combo. I had a corporate shoot that I did last week, and I just paired those two lenses together. I had the 28-70 f2 on one side, and then the 50-150 f2 on another side, and I had all the way from 28 to 150 at f2, and it was really, really nice. Really, really nice to be able to have that fast aperture to be able to make portraits with. And I will say that there are going to be things that I would miss about like an 85 1.4. If they would have made it a 70-150, it would have made the same amount of sense to me as a 50-150. This is probably going to be an auxiliary lens for me no matter what, but it's that whole 70-150 range that is really encompassing that kind of like 75 millimeter, that 85 millimeter, that 90 for the Leica people, that 105 millimeter, and that like 135. All of those kind of things are really just plopped into this single lens. And once you're getting into those higher numbers, you're getting a lot of compression, and you don't necessarily always need 1.4 as much as when 1.4 really stands out more in those like 50 millimeter, 50 millimeter, 35 millimeter, 24 millimeter. It makes a bigger difference, it feels like. And the whole point being that there were times where I was taking portraits where 85 millimeters made a lot of sense, and I could have made it work for sure, but I also had 135, 150, all those other ranges in here. So especially if you are someone like myself that is like a wedding photographer and the ability to just be on the fly, and I think that creativity comes from having limitations, but there are some times where convenience is really, really nice to have. There's going to be a ton of times where I would be at a wedding and I'd be kind of in between like Should I use an 85? Should I use a 135? And being able to just have this and have all of those different focal lengths covered for things like speeches, for things like ceremonies. It's just going to be a really, really, really nice tool. Is it a necessity? Does every wedding photographer need to sell their other 85 millimeters and their 135s and things like that to go buy this? No, but I will say that for someone like me, I have been kind of in the middle of a lot of different lenses. Should I buy an 85? I currently own a 135, and there's been a ton of times where I'm like, it'd be nice to have a 70-200. To me, this lens is kind of the combination of all of this. This is the 70-200 for people that don't want a 70-200. This is the person that can't decide between an 85 and a 135. This covers both of those. So if you kind of take a 85, a 135, and a 70-200, you shove them all into one lens, boom, you got a single lens here that is going to do all those things, not necessarily in an inexpensive way, but I think the person that is considering carrying all three of those lenses can often be pretty satisfied with having this one lens. And I think that someone like me is the person that, well, I do want to have all three of those lenses, but do I want to carry all three of them? No. So a lens like this makes a ton of sense to someone like me, at least. But let's check out some images and then I can talk through what I'm actually seeing in them and if this lens is actually kind of worthwhile. So right off the bat, a few things that are kind of a little bit more drawbacks and a couple things that I believe are going to be fixed. And obviously I know are going to be fixed, so Aaron's going to be really much of an issue. But right now you are seeing some barrel distortion on the wide end of things. So at 50, you're getting a little bit of barrel distortion. Popping into 150, you're getting a little bit of pincushion distortion, so it changes throughout the range. But that is just because this lens is brand new. The public does not have it, and they don't want to leak that kind of thing into profiles in Lightroom or something. So this is absolutely uncorrected, no profiles. But I've always seen Sony do a really good job with making profiles, so I have zero issues with those things getting fixed in the future. And then as far as bokeh goes, I definitely tried to get a lot of images that really showed off how that goes. I would say it looks really clean. Obviously the lens is super sharp. There was never going to be a doubt in my mind that it would be on that end either. At 150, at f2, you can definitely see it change quite a bit as it gets to the edges. You're getting like full footballs, cat's eye, all that kind of stuff. And it's definitely really, really swirly. I think that's going to be a non-issue for me. It's more of that like character kind of thing. Really, if you're going to be wanting to shoot f2 at 150 millimeters, and you're expecting everything to just be completely flat and all of the bokeh to look identical, it's just not something that I would ever expect. Would I like a little bit less of the cat's eye and that kind of thing? Probably, but I do like the swirly look and everything, and I think it looks really cool. At 50, it's a little bit bland, but I do find that the nice thing is that what you could do with a lens like this is have 50 millimeters and above covered on this, and maybe use a prime on a secondary camera, maybe like a 35 or a 28 or something. So the fact that it does go down to 50 millimeters does actually provide you with some more use cases. I will say again, 50 millimeters at f2 is kind of just like it's fine. Nothing crazy, but it does look good on this lens. But I will say this is going to be a more luxury for most people. It's definitely already in like the around $4,000 territory. So even before tariffs and things like that, you're not looking at an inexpensive lens. So for some people, they might want to buy like a Viltrox 135 and a Sony 85 1.8 or something. For me, this is going to be for the person that wants to just have the convenience of having all of those different focal lengths into one lens. It's for the person that wants to have an 85, a 135, and the flexibility of a 70-200 all in one lens. That person happens to be me. I'm not really necessarily excited by the price point of this lens, but it's not one of those things where when I saw it, I was like, oh, well, I can't believe you would price it that way. If you compare it to like a normal 70-200 and kind of stack all those things up, if you were going to buy 3 separate lenses, obviously they're going to be much more expensive than this. So is it something that I probably have the funds to purchase day one? Not necessarily without selling some other lenses and things, but do I think this is probably going to end up getting added to my wedding kit at some point regardless? Absolutely. I think the functionality and everything is just there, both for photo and video, obviously. I think especially for video where you're setting up something on a tripod, you want that longer shot and being able to dial in. Maybe your ideal shot is at 105, maybe it's at 150, maybe it's at 90, maybe it's at 100. Like the ability to have like a zoom lens on something like this and make nice little shallow depth of field portraits and things, it just all into one package. Really nice lens. I can carry it all day. So yeah, definitely recommend if you have the resources and it's something you're into. So thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and then check out these videos up here that YouTube thinks you might like, and I will see you in one of those.